and welcome to the Behavior Education Connection, the podcast that works to connect the world of behavior analysis and the world of education. We focus on topics important to behavior analysts who work in the public schools and those who support them. Join us and spend time gaining insights and ideas as our host talks with fellow behavior analysts as well as other experts in the field. Hello and welcome to our new episode of the Behavior Education Connection. I'm your host, Dr. Selena Layden, and today with me I have two wonderful guests, Dr. Paige Carter and Jenny McMichael. Hi, ladies.
Hello.
Hi, Selena.
First, before we get started, as we always do, if you don't mind introducing yourselves, and Paige, I'll let you go first if that's okay.
Sure. I'm Paige Carter. I am the Director of Special Education in Caroline County right now. I've been a BCBA for about a decade and served mainly students with autism in public schools. And so that's probably the most important role, I think, for this podcast. But being able to be here today is a privilege. Thank you for inviting me.
I'm glad you're here. I appreciate you being with me. Jenny.
Hi, so I am currently an autism specialist in Spotsylvania County Schools at our public separate program. I have taught students with autism for about 11 years, and I have been a BCBA for probably 8 years now.
So you two are an interesting pair with me today because what we're talking about actually is moving from supervision to mentorship. And one of the things that happens when we are getting our BCBA is, we have these required supervision hours, and it's a lot. And hopefully, in a good way, we get to know our supervisor pretty well. But then supervision comes to an end, and we hopefully pass our exam and we become a BCBA. And then we don't have that formal support in place anymore. And I mentioned your unique situation because you all happen to be in a supervisory experience together. So if you want to talk a little bit about did you know each other before you were in that situation? How did that develop? What was your relationship? What did that look like?
So I'll start. This is Jenny. I began in Spotsylvania about 12 years ago, and at the time, Paige, you were the autism coordinator.
I believe so. Mm-hmm.
And so I came in as a brand new teacher, like fresh out of grad school, with these ideas of what your special ed classroom looks like. And Paige came in and she's like, wait, this isn't going to work. And so Paige really got me from before school even started during that work week in helping me establish my classroom, helping me establish some instructional procedures, providing coaching and mentorship as a new autism teacher. And so I really feel like she already had that mentor position with me being a teacher. And really that I appreciate you greatly, Paige, because that's what got me into ABA. The suggestions that Paige had were behavior analytic in nature, and I was like, wait, that's magic. I want to know the magic. And Paige is like, well, it's actually called ABA. So then I began my coursework, and Paige was the guru that I reached out to for help. And naturally, I asked if she would be willing to supervise me. And so it was pretty natural to go from the mentor relationship into supervision, although just adding that structure and intensity.
I think the fact that we already knew each other when we entered supervision makes us unique to most supervision situations. But the fact that Jenny saw the magic, as you called it, saw what ABA can do and the structures can do for students and for the running of a classroom and the management and how you can turn, a 5.5 hour instructional day into something where things actually get accomplished on a regular basis. And Jenny grabbed a hold of that very quickly. And so, you don't suggest to every teacher, why don't you become a BCBA? For a variety of reasons, where you are in life, what you have, because you guys know it's a huge commitment. And Jenny was positioned just right to do that. And the procedures and the things we put in place really did, what she did was she took them and then she made them better. And so I think that all of those things really led to a really great supervision experience, because we already had that learning history, right? She already knew that I could make a suggestion that might make her classroom better. So we didn't have to work on that part of it. So I feel like we cheated a little bit when it comes to that supervision relationship, because we didn't have to work hard to establish that rapport. It was already there. So that helped us.
I don't think you cheated. I just think that you started before you actually entered into that formal supervisory relationship. And, you know, I would say one of the things that's kind of unique about working in a public school system is not every behavior analyst got their supervision or did their supervision experience in a public school. But for those that have, I don't know that it is as unique, that perhaps you did know your supervisor in some capacity before you started. You know, I think regardless, one of the important points, though, is that no matter how you meet your supervisor or when you meet them, you have to start out by having that time to build the relationship with each other. And I think, you know, in public schools, it can be even more important because, you know, Jenny was a classroom teacher, for example, and she was allowing you to come into her classroom. You know, I mean, at the end of the day, you could come into her classroom, but she could choose to ignore everything that you said. And, you know, she could be like, well, that's nice, Paige, but I'm going to do what I want to do. And I don't have to really implement this. And of course, that's not what happened in your case. But I think being able to be comfortable and almost being a little vulnerable as the supervisee so that you can benefit from that relationship and that experience. So let's talk about as you moved into supervision then. So how did that look? How did your relationship change, that kind of thing?
Well, I'll jump in on that one. I think the greatest challenge that we have, I'd maybe like to start there, was finding the time to do that between my role as an autism coordinator, where I had, you know, I don't know, 20 some programs across the division, and Jenny as a classroom teacher, because protecting instructional time was so important to both of us that I would come in and do an observation, take a few notes, and then we would meet off site. We did a lot of early mornings at Starbucks, as I recall, those kinds of appointments to sit down and really talk about what we saw and what was challenging right now, and hit specific things on the task list that we needed to hit. Because not all of those things obviously happen in an elementary autism classroom. So there are things you need to talk about outside of what you see and do and that. So I think that we drank a lot of coffee and refreshers to get together, and then would meet at off times at school and that sort of thing. But I think scheduling, when you're talking about public school, for that really quality time that's uninterrupted, was a big challenge. But I think we made it a priority, and that happened. But I would suspect that is a challenge for everybody trying to do this in the public school setting, because it's not like you can schedule school around your supervision, right? School happens, then you fit it in for everything. So, but I don't know, Jenny, if you had any other comments about that, but we had to be intentional.
Absolutely. And I think that me being in an autism specialist role now and kind of knowing where Paige was when she was my supervisor makes me more grateful for the time and energy that she did give me, because as a classroom teacher, I was like, oh, I have a problem, or how do I have this idea, let me call Paige. And Paige really did make herself very available to me. And I felt like she was there to answer questions and to point me to learning opportunities. And I don't know, at that point early in my career, that I knew that Paige had all the other responsibilities that she did. So she did a great job making it feel like I was a priority. And so now I'm like, wow, how did you manage that?
Well, you know, I think
I'm going
to give that some thought. But the one thing about it is, when you have that mentor-mentee or even collegial relationship now, you know, and you get a call from someone who you've learned that you make a suggestion, they take it, they make it better, and then they have another question. It's very reinforcing to be in that relationship. It's bucket filling. So, and with a schedule like I have had and have now, you have to prioritize bucket filling opportunities, right? And it's almost self-care to engage in a relationship that's so reinforcing, because like we were talking about just a few minutes ago, not every mentoring experience is like that. Not every classroom consultation that I do in my other roles or historically has been like that. And so I think the fact that the supervision experience was so very reinforcing made a tremendous difference for me, because it was just as beneficial for me to reinforce my own skills, but also to feel like I was doing something that was really important for students. So, hats off to you too, Jenny. I mean, you really did put in the work, and that's reinforcing for the supervisor. That's the work we want to do. That's the reason you become a supervisor.
Well, and I think part of what I'm hearing is that both of you are very committed to the relationship, right? This is a professional relationship. And, you enter into a contract when you do supervision, right? Like there's a contract that says, I'm the supervisor and I'll do this, and you're the supervisee and you're going to do this, or vice versa. But it sounds like it was successful for you because you both took that very seriously too.
I think so.
So the exciting part is that Jenny finished her supervision, she passed her exam, and she became a BCBA, which is very exciting and great. But then Jenny's career goes on, right? And so how did you all talk about, does support continue? What happens when that supervision ends and the person moves into their career? Because like I said earlier, that supervision ends, that formal relationship ends, your contract ends because you've fulfilled it. So what happens next?
And it was an interesting experience because I appreciated our time when we could speak behavior analyst and we could use technical terms and we could talk about why something works that you don't get to do with necessarily other teachers or professionals that you're working with. So there was like a void after that. I'm like, wait, who do I talk ABA with? And like figuring out like where you fit that into your life, of like where I can be technical and then where I have to be, using layman's terms and speaking more as a teacher to other teachers, because getting them to accept it and buy in. And so, I mean, I greatly miss times with Paige to talk about behavior analytic things. And so I reached out regularly. And we did still have the structures from our professional relationship in the school division.
And I think even now, if I have a question or if I'm trying to figure out something, the best way to handle something, and it has a behavior analytic, well, what doesn't really? But if I hit a roadblock, there are people in my realm, that you hold close, right? Because you need mentors and you need people to bounce ideas off of. And Jenny has remained that for me. And I don't think we ever said, so what do we do now? But I think that not very much time goes by and there's always a check-in from one of us. How you doing? What's going on? Like Jenny just last year got this new role in Spotsylvania, which is a role that I have held before, which is kind of nice. So there was a natural thing to talk about there too. And with each person that has taken on that gig of directing that program has brought new and exciting things to it. And I think talking about those is reinforcing too. So, but I think that we've just been really intentional to not let too much time go by, because I, like Jenny, I'm not surrounded by behavior analysts here in my division. I am the only one. So it is really important, though I do have 2 people pursuing next year, so I'll be a supervisor again. But I think that it is, it's just important to maintain that, even to keep your professional vocabulary. If you don't use it, you'll lose it, right? So we know why things happen and we can talk it through, and I can get right back to the professional word, but I have to have somebody else to circle that with me, because it doesn't come natural in the school environment when you're talking about a group of administrators or whoever you're with at that time. So it is nice to have someone that you can continue that with, that collegial relationship.
And it's so exciting to find those people. In my new position, I have a teacher that's pursuing her BCBA, and I coached her through the PFA and SBT process because I had been using that in my classroom. And it's just so exciting. I'm like, we're going to do the training together. I can we did the bug and ear, we did coaching through paras. It's so exciting to do ABA with people that can do it with fidelity and that understand it and know the language and the principles and buy into it. It's definitely a high.
Well, one of the things that I would add is you all have made a commitment to each other. And, that started out, it sounds like, even before you became a supervisor and supervisee in that relationship. But you've maintained that commitment to each other, which I think is admirable. When we as behavior analysts take on supervisees, we are not required to continue any kind of relationship with them after we fulfill our contractual agreement of supervision. But I would offer that I feel, and this is my commentary, my opinion, that we have somewhat of an ethical obligation to support these people through their career. And that doesn't mean that we have to do it with the same frequency, intensity, whatever. But I do feel like when people move into their first role as a behavior analyst, they need somebody, right? They need a mentor. They need a professional network to support them. And, you as their previous supervisor might be the best option they have. And so what are some words of advice that you might give someone as they're thinking about taking on supervisees, knowing that, I don't want to take on a lifetime commitment, so please don't run away from being a supervisor. But what are some words of advice that you might have for someone who's considering being a supervisor?
Selena, I had a supervisor who was she supported a local private day school when I was pursuing, and I was in public school because I was, again, they're the only one there in the beginning. And so the one thing that she did is just periodically check in with me. How you doing? It was a Facebook message or a phone call just to say, I was thinking about you today, or, I encountered this today and it reminded me of when we talked about, and she would check in probably once every other month. And then the space got a little more, and she's moved away and is no longer in the area now, but she was incredibly supportive to me. And it wasn't as frequent as Jenny and I talk, but it was enough to remind me, that this is a resource for me. And I can go back to her if I encounter something that I need some help with. And it was, she was very intentional about it, and I appreciated it. And I think that would be advice that I give. Just reach out and check in every once in a while, because it's easy to get caught up and go about your business, but it makes a difference. It did for me, and I think it did for Jenny too. So that would be my advice, just to check in.
And I think intentionally connecting your supervisee to a network of support, be it professional organizations, VAPSPAN, other BCBAs in the area, but helping them to not be that island, to say here's other people that might have this field of expertise, or here's other people that, you can connect with and can support you, and you can support them.
Yeah, I like that a lot. One of the things that I guess, hindsight is 2020. I don't know that I've intentionally had these conversations maybe the way I should have either with my supervisees, but thinking about it now, I'm fortunate enough, I've stayed in touch with my supervisees and I know where they are and I do touch base with them. But, I do think for supervisors, maybe making a point when you're signing those paperwork at the end and, kind of finalizing the supervision process, having a conversation about, what do you want supports to look like moving forward? Do you want to talk? Do you want to meet? What does this look like moving forward? Because it can be kind of a weird time of transition between when you finish your supervision and then you're starting your new role as an official BCBA, particularly if you're starting in a public school system, because both of you have talked about this. You might be the only one, or you might be one of a couple. And so making sure that you do have whether it is that supervisor or someone else, that connection to a professional network, so that you're not an island and you're not doing this all by yourself.
I think so. And I think another important point is that maybe, depending on where your supervisor works or where it's important to point to different opportunities for BCBAs, but I think that especially in public schools, if you can connect your folks to other people in public schools, like the network, and it just is so important, because it really is two different worlds between a more clinical setting and public school. And being able to apply the things that we know is very different. And so just making sure that the folks that are in schools are connected is super important, especially a network of folks who've also been teachers. There's just something, it's just very different. And I really think that has been important for my career, to find those people and connect to them. It's been good. So Jenny, thank you for that suggestion.
And I think one of my biggest challenges in becoming a BCBA and ongoing is really looking at like that BCBA hat and that teacher hat, and the fact that really you can't choose which one you're doing. And so the school system, the teacher way of doing it, and how to mesh those. How do I use these new skills or these new responsibilities in this setting that is kind of a box? And so having Paige and other BCBAs in the school system to say, like, this is how I integrated it, or just asking questions to help process it, is helpful. It was easy to learn the skills, but then learning how to apply it in your setting, I think, is the challenging part.
And learning how to share what you're doing with others. I think that is something that Jenny and I really worked on, and it benefited both of us, because we were supporting staff in different ways, but we were still supporting staff to implement behavior analytic things when they did not necessarily have all the training. And so really being able to talk and bounce that off each other made a big difference.
Well, ladies, I really do appreciate your time today. I love this topic. I think it's such an important topic. Before we go, do you have any last minute thoughts that you want to share?
I can't really think of anything.
I appreciate you and what you do for the network. And, like we said, I don't always get to see Paige, so I appreciate that this is an opportunity to connect with Paige.
Well, I do thank you so much both for your time and your knowledge and your willingness to share your experiences. Just to recap, we have again Dr. Paige Carter and Jenny McMichael. Thank you both so much today for your time. And to our listeners, we'll see you on our next episode.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Behavior Education Connection. Join us next time for another great conversation about behavior analysis in the schools. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on an episode. Sending out a special thanks to the Virginia Department of Education for supporting our work. We look forward to connecting with you all again soon.